Okay, so have you heard this? There's this crazy story going around about bringing back like extinct animals.
Yeah, I saw that. Sounds wild, right?
Yeah, and like it's not just, some random theory.
It's colossal biosciences again. Those
Yeah.
guys are really pushing the boundaries.
Right, colossal biosciences. So we got to dive into this. We're talking about the resurrection, that's what they're calling it, at least the resurrection of the dire wolf.
And we've got a pretty good source to work with here.
Yeah, that CNN article, right?
Exactly. Dated Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. So pretty recent stuff.
Hot off the presses. And I mean, it'd be great to kind of, break this down for everyone listening, help them understand what exactly Colossal is claiming here, how they even pulled it off, and what it all means. Because, it's one thing to read a headline, but to really grasp the significance, well, that's where we come in.
Definitely. Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about, bringing back some creature from the past. It's about the technology, the ethics, the whole, implications for conservation.
Right. And I mean, direwolf, that's a name that sparks the imagination. For a lot of people, they probably think of Game of Thrones, those massive, almost mythical wolves.
Oh, absolutely. Game of Thrones definitely brought dire wolves into the pop culture spotlight.
But the science we're talking about today is rooted in real, tangible evidence, fossils and DNA and all that.
It's the real deal, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start with what Colossal actually announced.
Okay, so headline news. Colossal Biosciences, this biotech company based in Dallas, they're claiming they've created like actual living dire wolf pups, 3 of them. And they're going all in, calling it the, quote, world's first successfully de-extincted animal.
Bold statement, right?
Super bold. And according to the CNN article, the dire wolf, it went extinct about 12,500 years ago. But the DNA they used, it comes from fossils, some of which are up to like 72,000 years old.
72,000 years. It's almost mind-boggling to think about that time scale.
Right. So how do you even begin to bring something back from that long ago? Like, walk us through the process.
All right. So they start with these like tiny fragments of ancient DNA from the fossils.
Okay, like little pieces of the dire wolf's genetic blueprint, basically.
Yeah. And then they compare that ancient DNA to the DNA of the dire wolf's closest living relative, which is, as many people know, the gray wolf.
Right, they're like cousins, evolutionarily speaking.
Exactly. So by comparing the two, they identify the specific genetic sequences that make the dire wolf unique, the things that set it apart from the gray wolf.
Got it. So then what do they, like, stitch together a whole new genome?
Not quite. They utilize this amazing gene editing technology called CRISPR. Think of it like molecular scissors that allow them to make precise changes to the gray wolf DNA to insert those specific dire wolf sequences.
Oh, so they're kind of like editing the gray wolf DNA to be more dire wolf-like?
That's the idea. And the article mentions they made about 20 edits across 14 specific genes.
20 edits, 14 genes. Does that even tell us, like, how different they were genetically? Is that a lot of changes or a little, in the grand scheme of things?
That's a really good point. So while it might not sound like a huge number, those particular genes are thought to be crucial for the dire wolf's distinctive traits, the things we can actually observe, what scientists call the phenotype.
So it's like they're making these small, targeted tweaks to the recipe, but they end up with a totally different dish in the end.
Exactly, a perfect analogy. And in the dire wolf's case, those 14 genes are believed to control things like its coat miller, fur length and thickness, maybe even its size, and that powerful jaw structure. The CNN article describes dire wolves as larger than gray wolves, with a wider head, lighter, thicker fur, and a stronger bite.
Okay, so they're basically using the gray wolf as a foundation and then making these precise genetic edits to guide it back towards looking and maybe even acting like a dire wolf.
Yeah.
And what happens after they've edited the cells?
Well, now they've got these genetically modified cells, and this is where the cloning technology comes in. They take the DNA from those cells and insert it into an empty egg cell,
It's like they're building a brand new embryo.
right? And they stimulate it to start developing. And here's a cool twist.
Yeah.
They don't implant these embryos into, like, wolf mothers. They use surrogate mothers that are large, mixed-breed domestic dogs. The article calls them hounds.
Whoa, wait, so they use dogs to give birth to these, like, proto-dire wolves.
Yep, surprising, right?
That's pretty wild. And it actually worked. Like, they had successful births.
They did. The CNN article says 2 male pups were born on October 1st, 2024, followed by a female pup on January 30th, 2025. That's the trio colossals calling the first de-extincted dire wolves.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. But the article does say that calling them fully de-extincted might not be scientifically accurate. Like, there's some nuance there, right?
Yeah, de-extinction definitely has a certain ring to it, but the reality is these pups are more like hybrids. Genetically speaking, they're still 99.9% gray wolf, according to the article.
So most of their DNA is still gray wolf, so what's the dire wolf part?
The technology focused on incorporating those specific dire wolf genes that are responsible for those key visible traits, the phenotype, remember? So genetically, they're mostly gray wolf, but they've got these instructions, these dire wolf genes, that should lead to them looking a lot like a dire wolf.
Okay, so it's more about recreating the essence of the extinct animal, the way it looks and maybe behaves, rather than creating a perfect genetic replica.
You got it. And the article actually quotes Love Dalen, who's a professor of evolutionary genomics and an advisor to Colossal. He poses this interesting question. How many genes have to be different for us to truly consider an animal a dire wolf? Like, where do you draw the line? But he also acknowledges that these animals carry dire wolf genes, and this is important, look more like a dire wolf than anything we've seen in the last 13,000 years. His point is they basically resurrected the dire wolf phenotype.
So they might not be like pure dire wolves on a genetic level, but they embody the core features that define the species. Now, Colossal, they're known for, thinking big, right? They've got other de-extinction projects in the works.
Oh yeah, they've got their sights set on some pretty iconic species. The woolly mammoth, of course, is their most well-known project, but they're also working on the dodo and the Tasmanian tiger.
Quite the lineup. But this dire wolf project, it seems like they were keeping it under wraps, right? It wasn't on their public radar.
Yeah, this one kind of came out of left field. It wasn't something they'd been talking about openly, almost like a surprise reveal.
Like, hey, look what we can do. So how does Colossal see this accomplishment? What does it mean for their overall mission?
Ben Land, their CEO, is quoted in the CNN article saying that this is the first real-world proof that their end-to-end de-extinction technology stack works. So they're pretty excited about it.
End-to-end de-extinction technology stack. That's a mouthful. Can you break that down for us, non-scientists?
Sure. Basically, they're talking about the whole process, the complete toolkit they've developed, from analyzing the ancient DNA to gene editing, creating the embryos, and then bringing those embryos to term using surrogate mothers. This success with the dire wolf, which is pretty closely related to the gray wolf, it's like a proof of concept for their more ambitious projects, like the woolly mammoth, where the genetic differences are much greater, and finding a suitable surrogate is way more challenging.
So the dire wolf was like a test run showing that their system actually works, and it kind of sets the stage for these even more ambitious projects.
Exactly. And it's not just about bringing back extinct animals, which is obviously a big deal in itself.
Yeah.
Colossal also hopes this technology can be used to help endangered species that are, still with us but struggling to survive.
Yeah, like a more immediate conservation application.
Right. The article mentions that they've produced 2 litters of cloned red wolves, which are critically endangered, using a less invasive cloning method they developed during their dire wolf research.
Wow, so this futuristic de-extinction research could have direct benefits for conservation efforts today.
It's a pretty cool connection. It shows that even if people have reservations about de-extinction, the technologies being developed could have wider applications that everyone can get behind.
But, whenever you talk about something as groundbreaking as this, there are always bigger questions. Ethical questions, ecological concerns. What does the article have to say about those aspects?
Oh yeah, the whole field of de-extinction is definitely controversial. It raises a lot of important questions. And one of the big ones is about resources. Some people argue that the money and effort being poured into these de-extinction projects could be better spent on traditional conservation efforts, protecting endangered species and their habitats.
Makes sense. I mean, resources are limited, right? And then there's the question of animal welfare. Like, what about the surrogate dog mothers, the dire wolf pups themselves? Are they being treated ethically?
The article does address that. It says the pups are living in a secure, monitored facility. It's 2,000 acres with zoo-grade fencing, security personnel, drones, and camera feeds. So it sounds pretty high-tech and secure. And Colossal emphasizes that the facility is certified by the American Humane Society and registered with the USDA. So they're trying to demonstrate that they're following proper standards for animal care.
So at least within that controlled environment, it seems like they're taking animal welfare seriously. But what about the bigger picture? Like, what happens if down the line they decide to release these animals into the wild? Could these essentially resurrected predators survive in modern ecosystems that have changed so much since they went extinct? What would the ecological impact be?
That's a huge question. And the article brings in Christopher Preston, a professor of environmental philosophy, to weigh in on that. He acknowledges that Colossal seems to be taking good care of the animals in their facility, but he raises concerns about the potential ecological role of these dire wolf hybrids. He points out that we already have issues with gray wolf populations in some areas with people being opposed to them for various reasons, and then you introduce these new animals that are, similar but different. Where would they fit in? What would they eat? Would they outcompete other predators? It's a complex puzzle, and he basically asks, what viable ecological niche would these animals occupy in the modern world?
It does seem like releasing an extinct predator into a dramatically altered environment would be risky, to say the least, and potentially have unintended consequences.
Definitely. The article mentions that Colossal has talked about their long-term plans for the woolly mammoth project, which involve potentially using them for ecological restoration in the Arctic. But when it comes to the direwolf hybrids, their ecological purpose is much less clear. Like, what role would they play? And is it even safe or ethical to try to reintroduce them into the wild?
Right, so that's something to think about. Okay, let's talk about the financial side of this. The article mentions that Colossal has raised a lot of money.
Yeah, they've pulled in a whopping $435 million in funding since they started in 2021.
That's some serious cash. It shows you how much interest and investment there is in this whole de-extinction field.
Absolutely. And now, with this success on the Dire Wolf project, it makes you wonder what they'll achieve next.
Right, so what's the latest on their woolly mammoth project? That's the one everyone's been talking about.
The article gives a quick update. It says they've revised the timeline a bit, and they're now aiming for the first woolly mammoth calves to be born in 2028.
So a little further out than they initially thought, but it's still in progress. And it looks like this dire wolf project was a significant step towards that ultimate goal.
For sure. It's validated their technology and given them valuable experience.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. For everyone listening, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into Colossal and their dire wolf resurrection?
Okay, so the main points. Colossal Biosciences says they've successfully created 3 dire wolf pups using ancient DNA and some seriously advanced gene editing. But, and this is important, these pups are technically hybrids. They're 99.9% gray wolf genetically, but they've been engineered to have those specific physical traits that make them look like dire wolves.
Right, so it's more about bringing back the image of the dire wolf, the phenotype, rather than a perfect genetic replica. And it sparked a whole new debate in the scientific community about what de-extinction really means.
And, beyond the wow factor of bringing back extinct animals, there are the ethical and ecological implications to consider. This technology has the potential to be a powerful tool for conservation, but there are still a lot of unknowns about the long-term consequences.
It's like we're stepping into uncharted territory here. It's both exciting and a little bit scary. I mean, just imagine the possibility of bringing back species that have been gone for thousands of years. It forces us to rethink what extinction even means.
And what our responsibility is to the natural world. I mean, if we can bring back extinct animals, should we? What impact would that have on existing ecosystems? And are there other, maybe more pressing conservation priorities we should be focusing on?
It's a lot to ponder, and for all of you listening, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this whole de-extinction thing? Is it a good idea? A bad idea? Where do we draw the line? Let us know in the comments. This is a conversation that's just getting started.
And it's a conversation we need to have. Because the future of life on Earth, well, it might depend on it.